Good afternoon. Welcome to the Recovery and Resilience Task Force regular meeting. Today is September 3rd, 2021. Welcome, Mr. Mayor Jorge Lorza. Welcome to the member of the task force, and welcome to the public who is in the room and who is connected online. My name is Oscar Mejias. I am the co-chair of this task force with Angie Ancoma, who is not present in the room today, and that she will be connected online. As a reminder, the meeting today, we will have a very hot topic and very important topic about housing. We will be talking about community engagement report, and we will appreciate your input. This meeting is about to collect information, to hear the input of the community in order to present recommendations on how to do a better distribution of the funding coming from the American Rescue Plan. So say that, let's start the meeting. Present. Present.
Present. Here. Shannon Carroll. Here. Sabrina Kadari. Ms. Ashton. Julie Britt.
Present.
Jim Carroll. Michelle Singh. Larry Warner.
Present.
Present up there, but not in person. Paige. Present. Carr. So we have 7 present. Absent, we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. We will have today our next topic, we have a conversation about the community engagement report. That will be a 10-minute presentation for system change strategies. And after that will be a 10 minutes space with question and answers. So, will you please? Yes.
So I'm presenting on behalf of System Change Strategy. My name is Daniel Howard. Thank you for bringing this up for you. We have engaged with an online survey right now at cvonline.com or at pvd.com online as we can take. If you want to have the next slide. So I'm going to go over 2 things. I'm going to go over quantitative results. I'm going to go over qualitative results. We're collecting those 2 aspects from the survey. So we have very preliminary data from the quantitative end of things.
Excuse me, I'm sorry for the interruption. The people in the public listening?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, thank you.
At the time that we pulled the data, it was August 25th. We had 96 responses. There were a few duplicates in that. We then have vetted Christian Botman, contractor that vetted Power BI. And I just want to once again emphasize this is preliminary. There was a calculation error in the initial 96 responses in the way ascending has been calculated, but we've adjusted for that. So I just want to be upfront and transparent with everything. Next slide. Disproportionately, the first response are from the Ocean 906 zip code, the city, the Mayor Center for City Services, and the Community Relations Department. They are going to go out and get Canvas data to make up for the issue. We still, again, 96 responses is 1/10 of what we are planning to collect. So we still have a long way to go, as we discussed at the beginning. Disproportionately white in our responses, not as Latino as the city population as a whole. And then there's some other options. And disproportionately older than the city as well. So we need to adjust for age as well, to think about getting younger people involved. And so that's the kind of thing we'll discuss with the city and how to address that. When we asked about how the money should be spent, whether it should be more towards pre-existing conditions that contributed to the disparate impact of the pandemic, or whether it should be the COVID effect, or whether it should be a balanced approach between those responding. The vast majority, nearly 2/3, have chosen to spend on a balanced approach. For those who didn't, 2/3 of those supported going to pre-existing problems. And when we go by how funds are distributed, this again, preliminary data, this is very early. Housing and homelessness, city services, those are the top 2 categories. Arts and culture is up. For qualitative data, Mara and I went through all 96 responses, we read each response, and then we coded everything. We had 125 unique responses. We collected this data on August 30th. And then we categorized that into 14 categories. So we might count the next one. So of those 125 responses, 30% mentioned some sort of lifestyle change, and some of that was remote work. Often people expressed concern for others that they felt like their neighbors were struggling, that they were seeing difficulty around them. Quite a number had 23% had a personal financial impact, whether they lost their job, they had a low income, they fired early. Many mentioned small businesses, lots of restaurants, and quite a number expressed a mental health concern that they felt like their mental health was deteriorating, or they felt that their neighbors' mental health was deteriorating. A number have seen issues with the city, and so on. There's one no response. And to just give you a flavor of these, I've selected some quotes. So the most president was before, and they're afraid to go back to work unless their work requires not to get, they don't believe that's going to happen. A number of folks, they lost a friend or a family member in COVID. Obviously, who said can't speak. So we don't have that number. A number of folks mentioned that they lost their base community, or their weren't able to finish their community differently. And then issues with rent. Well, again, those feelings of isolation, the lack of public gathering. The one sort of bright spot I will say is that a number of people expressed an increase in neighborhood solidarity, and they felt that they got to know their neighbors a bit better during the pandemic. Once again, I just want to plug the survey, community rescue plan, phase, 2-day day, plan day, step day, and the on.
Thank you. Any questions?
So you said you plan to, so this is 1/10? So you mentioned, you're going to canvas. What are some of the other ideas you have for?
We're gonna spend more on social media as well to get that out. We have our community engagement events coming as well, so collect surveys there as best we can, and whatever else we can do. Develop plans where we need to. We can ask the city if schools are going to come back in session. Kids they have skin in this, right? And the money's going to impact their lives a little longer than anyone else. So if the schools would be interested in participating in this, I think we would love to get them on board as well.
Yeah.
Just an observation. We have people between 18 and 39 in low participation, so it should be part of the communication strategy to attack that target.
Yes.
We are not talking here about solving actual problems. We are talking about the future, and they should be involved in the solution for the future.
Absolutely, and we can do demographic targeting more robustly.
Just as an observation. Good.
So I also wanted to, in terms of doing more targeted, I was hoping to have these are great response turnout, so this is great. But another method is also targeting the neighborhood associations, the community centers as well, where people are going after, kids are going after school, the neighborhood resource centers. The service center and other places And it would be also great to figure out how to like also work with some of our youth-led organizations, because I think having like young people's voices are also critical, especially as we're having conversation around job development, public, like investment in public safety and things of that nature. And finally, also thinking about like how can we like have people around the responses based on I think that it's broken down by age, but also if folks are business owners in the city, et cetera. I think it would be interesting to see what percentages are coming from different groups. And also looking at what type of responses are coming in terms of like how we should prioritize allocation of the funds.
Yeah, this is Power BI analysis. That tool has a lot of capabilities to show that we are collecting, are you a business owner, are you frequent cultural venues in the city, are you even a resident question as well. These are not all resident responses, but the stakeholders in Providence, I think, that's beyond just residents, although so we are developing a dashboard, and that will have demographic data that you will be able to split these out and look at and filter everything out. Once we can get that up, there's some time to program it and everything. So we're working today's webmaster to make sure we can get that online, and then anyone can come look at the data and Providence.
Yeah, please.
And also just going back to the respondents, and how disproportionately from 0296, which, in terms of like the data, is a more affluent community. And then when you're looking at some of the other communities, like 0295, which is where my parents live, the responses are not as high, but those also are communities that were impacted quite adversely by COVID. So in terms of like the targeted, we should also target it in neighborhoods with the neighborhood association, but also break down the demographics of these different neighborhoods so that we can be a little bit more strategic, because there are also various cultures and different languages that are spoken in those neighborhoods. And I think part of like increasing the survey response rate is also making sure that people what we're asking of them and understand the survey.
Yeah. We have quite a number of community partners engaged, and two of them have yet to get an extra outreach effort. So we are going to, we have this translated into Cloud and MI and Columbia as well, that paper version. And so we're going to continue to reach the same languages.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick question. So, can you just give us a sense of what this is working up to in terms of the final product?
Final product.
So, and specifically, so once you collect all the survey data, ideally, hopefully, it'll be proportional to various demographics throughout the city, but more than likely, it's not going to be. So, are the survey results going to be presented in a way that sort of smooths out and controls for all those factors?
Yeah.
Or will just the raw results be presented to it?
We will weight quantitative data, qualitative data. We're collecting a lot of qualitative data. That is going to present to be raw. So I think as council members, are going to have to adjudicate you read the written words and you take that into account. You also are going to have to adjudicate whether what the community has come up with through our survey is right. Like if you know that there's a need for this thing, you are all experts. And so I do think, as a task force, you're going to have to make the survey is going to point one way. It may not be completely representative because it's going to stay on voluntary. So you are first here to make the research.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Our next session, we will be talking about the community engagement event that was hosted last week by Mr. Jim Vincent, who is present in the room, and Marcela Betancourt, who is connected online. So, the space is yours.
Oh, I'm sorry. Briefly, you're going to have a brief presentation of the findings from those, and then Marcel and Jim will be available to answer questions.
Who will do the presentation?
How do you
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me and see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. So like Mike said, my name is Abby Godino. I'm with the Systems Change Strategies team and just want to go over a report of the events and what we learned from the 2 events last week. Of course, want to thank the task force members who joined us, as well as Jim from the NAACP and Marcela from the Latino Policy Institute for being brave and going first and hosting some great events. So to give a quick overview of the event format, just so folks understand, we had an interactive panel discussion. So our hosts acted as a moderator, task force members were panelists, and there was a direct dialogue with participants. So a participant could raise a question, and then a task force member would directly respond. And so we felt that was really helpful, that there was engagement around the ideas brought forward. We went over the American Rescue Plan Act, the task force, and the recommendations process. Folks really were interested in all of those pieces. And so for the second event, we were able to include a little more context for folks to understand, the purpose of the community event and the other pieces. And I especially want to emphasize that each event, we were pointing folks to the Rescue Plan website and to the survey so that we can get more information there and include them in those pieces. But also there's ways that community events and individuals can host, or community organizations can host these events themselves. And so we were showing folks that they could do that there. We had events interpreted into Spanish and American Sign Language this time around, and we'll include other languages as makes sense going forward. So the first event was Tuesday, August 24th from the NAACP. We had 51 people in attendance. It was a virtual meeting, and about 11 people engaged or spoke. The chat was very active, but you can see, 11 out of 51, there are many shy people, and so we'll have to elicit their feedback through other avenues. So the Latino Policy Institute event was on Thursday, the 26th. We had 31 people in attendance on Zoom, although that event was also broadcast on Facebook. And so we had about 9 people participate either in the chat or direct dialogue. So a couple of reflections we had after the event. I think the 2 that were more important were that people were really were interested in understanding the recovery plan and process, like I said. And it's something that the task force has talked about quite a bit in the city and the project management team about transparency. And so really taking to heart all that we can to share everything that's happened. Of course, the recordings of the 2 events are on the website. I'm sure this report will be in the open meeting minutes and also on the website, along with the survey and everything else. But the second piece I really want to emphasize, especially when it comes to making recommendations, is that so many of the topics that people brought up as important to them or as reflections of the ways COVID had impacted them were really intersectional. So somebody might bring up housing, but they also talked about how, mental health was affected or family stability was affected. And so when we think about these issues, they're all very interconnected. And so hopefully we can come up with recommendations and solutions that will speak to that. So jumping into topics and sentiments, this first page is, I would consider these more sentiments than topics, but certainly a lot of folks recognize that the problems COVID exacerbated were already existing issues that really needed some attention. And so along with that sentiment was a desire to see existing organizations and existing programs be a part of the solutions. Folks felt that it was really not a time to be inventive or innovative and try new things as much as we can, so that we can really have direct aid and impact by going with organizations and programs that are already embedded in Providence. And I think along with that idea too, folks wanted to target hardest hit communities first, because they have been the communities that have seen the exacerbation of COVID. And I think, it sounded like investing in existing organizations also had trust among people in the community. And so there's that benefit there. They sort of tie into each other. So topics, housing and homelessness was by far the most addressed topic in the two events. And from a number of directions, folks talked about the rental housing stock. They talked about existing stock, problems with lead paint. Of course, homelessness is still an issue. And, the opportunity to maybe rehab abandoned buildings or find creative ways. Another idea that had come up was apparently other cities are building housing units on top of existing buildings. So it's certainly something people are passionate about, and it's necessary for folks to have adequate housing. And so that was by far the most important issue that came up. The workforce and small business was another topic that I think ties into housing. People need somewhere to live so that they can show up at work and not be worrying about where they're going to spend the night. So there was a fair amount of talking about job training and placement programs, as well as getting to the basic needs training, basic skills training that folks need to be placed in jobs or to be successful in the job opportunities they find. Youth investments was another issue that came up quite frequently. Wanting to be creative about extending the learning opportunities available to students. So not just after school and summer programs, but enrichment programs, and certainly programs that that youth find interesting and that can get their attention, in a way that a maybe standard curriculum couldn't. Of course, with those youth investments, finding places and spaces where you can get together and recreate, like libraries or recreation centers, were also brought up. And we have food and basic security or basic needs, excuse me. There's still issues within, especially certain neighborhoods in the city that don't have adequate to healthy foods and fresh foods. And of course, people still have trouble accessing healthcare. This is a pandemic, it is a health crisis. And so it seemed imperative that helping people access healthcare or options, even if it's short of insurance, and helping folks navigate and find those resources was a refrain we heard quite often. So that was the overall overview. I think Jim and Marcella are available to answer questions with me if anyone has any. Thank you. And while people are thinking of their questions, I'll just add we have a series of events coming up. I don't know that we'll have 2 in 1 week again. This was the first time, but we're asking task force members to look into their schedules and see where they can join. I think having task force members there is pretty key to make sure that this is responsive and comprehensive to the work that you guys do every Friday. So.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Abby for giving my presentation. Good job, Abby.
Thanks, Jim.
Did exactly the way I would have written it. Thank you for that, and thank you for task force members with you. Councilman was fortunate, Peter and Carol being here, and it was the first one, and I think it was good. I think that the questions were timely. I thought that the task force did a good job in terms of fostering the discussion. I also agree that housing and homelessness is a key area. I myself spent 8 years in the housing coordinator in Providence, 14 years at Rhode Island Housing. So certainly, housing is near and dear to not only my heart, but it's the NAACP Providence branch. And I know it's just my action question quality as well. So I think focusing on housing is the right way to go. Certainly, and there are other issues like the youth investment, like just hit on a committee with the mayor. That aspect of the plan, but I'm pleased with the process went.
I saw in the presentation that folks expressed an interest and support in reparations in particular. Could you tell us a little bit about how that conversation went?
Well, I don't remember a lot in terms of the conversation. But I do know that that's something that is important, and that's something that I support. I know that you met and the entrepreneurs group, we had processes to tone reconciliation and reparations. And I think we're still in the process of coming upon that to proceed. Nobody's jumping into conclusions in terms of what that looks like, but I think that the fact that the process is very important because unlike other places, it's not even in progress. So if we could hear in Providence, we really have some substantive discussion on the very important issue of reparation. So thank you, Mayor.
The hand. Abby's hand raised.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Mayor, for the question. That was something that came up in the chat from the LPI event, and Marcella read it into the record. So there wasn't a lot of engagement, but it came up at a time where folks were talking about how we can target direct aid to those suffering the most.
Another question? Public?
I actually was present in that meeting, and I think that Nervin has been really touching on everything. I really appreciate your presence there, Nervin. But I think that we should be incentivizing the data grab. To get the data, I think we should dangle, a carrot to be able to grab the data in those areas specifically. I don't know what kind of budget has been allocated to go out to these community centers, but I believe that to do that, I think that there should be I'm not saying that, the vaccine card or give it something on the card for $20, but what I'm saying is that put something out there to kind of gather the people in those specific areas, if it's, and you have to make sure that you're on the correct platforms. And really, this meeting was really a very positive meeting, and I was very impressed by it, but I think that there's not enough involvement, and especially the people that are really, truly affected by what has actually happened during the past 14 months. So I think that incentivizing the graph will give you much more data to be able to do this type of meeting, to be able to move forward. Very difficult because most of these things are kind of auto-populated questions, and so, you want to leave the creativity up for them to kind of find the solution and allow them to answer them instead of us asking them kind of in a, bullet point kind of situation where they're kind of under the gun to answer that question specifically. So I think that if we do that, it would give us more information to be able to allocate these funds. So that's what I want to talk about specifically, especially on this. I think reparations doesn't actually have to be in the form of money. It can be in systems and programs that are actually put in place to stabilize the individual that has gone through this fight. So I think that we should be looking at building systems to where they are included in the equation going forward in the comprehensive plan of what's happening right now. So, and that's in terms of, setting up, reintegration and better reforms on policies that reintegrate them. So they can feel included. Once they do that, then they'll be more apt to staying engaged with what is actually happening in the community. That's all.
Thank you.
Piggyback on what Jeremy was saying, paying a certain team to go along because most people in our community, we know these internet network do, so I feel like the system together to take that, people will knock on more doors in the community and get certain dollars and take them to better.
I just want to address one point about that there is a plan to use the $25 Visa gift card as this for survey completion.
Thank you. We don't have additional questions, so then let's move to the next topic, which is we will have a presentation regarding housing and community development. And our first presentation will be Community Development Block Grant, the CDBG grant, will be Emily Friedman. Please.
Hi, good afternoon. One moment, I'll share my screen. Can everyone see me, hear me, see the screen?
Yeah, well,
I think that's the wrong screen. Hold on one
Yep.
sec, Emily. There you go. Now we're good.
Excellent. So just seeing the presentation?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm so pleased to join you today alongside my colleague Bonnie Nickerson on behalf of the city's planning department to speak with you about investments that the city has made to date in COVID recovery and community development, and really look forward to a robust discussion around the identified gaps and needs for future recovery, particularly around housing and homelessness. So a little bit of background. The city receives funding through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for community development and housing initiatives as an entitlement community on an annual basis. So every year we receive what's called the Community Development Block Grant, which is approximately a $5 million block grant to the city. The Home Investment Partnerships Program, which is approximately a $1 million grant to the city. The Emergency Solutions Grant, which is about $450,000, and Housing Opportunities for People with AIDS, HOPWA funding of about $1.1 million. So these are block grants that flow down to the city, and the city is empowered to identify appropriate eligible uses for those funds. We also were the recipient of a one-time disaster relief influx through the 2020 CARES Act. And so in addition to our annual allocation of funds, we received an additional $4.7 million in CDBG CV disaster relief, so CDBG disaster relief, additional Emergency Solutions Grant disaster relief, additional funding under the HOPWA program for specific disaster relief. And then we will be receiving a forthcoming allocation of home funds through the rescue plan of $5.9 million for housing related disaster relief. So with these block grants, we solicit proposals for federally funded initiatives in accordance with identified priorities and needs. In terms of our entitlement funding, those needs and priorities are established through our what's called our consolidated planning process. Every 5 years, we do an extensive public engagement process that identifies community development priorities, areas of need for investment. And so we published our 2020 to 2024 consolidated plan, which we then update on an annual basis as needed with ongoing stakeholder engagement and public engagement. So we can solicit proposals from nonprofit agencies to carry out initiatives as what we call city subrecipients. ARPA funding will function in a similar way. We are also able to use those entitlement funds for internal department-driven initiatives. We award funding contracts on a competitive basis, and we're empowered to vet and seek quality service delivery for the best price. So we have vetted past investments for the level of direct service provided, ensuring that we are targeting those dollars to our most underserved neighborhoods and populations. We have to ensure with federal dollars that agencies have capacity to deliver in a compliant manner, and that the projects are ready to proceed. Obviously, the need is real, and we want to ensure that projects can be delivered in as timely a manner as possible. And again, all of the projects and services that we fund have to be direct impact. So they have to provide a direct benefit to low and moderate income residents, or they are not eligible. So again, we issue an annual RFP with those entitlement funds. Through those entitlement funds, we are able to support community center operations, the delivery of critical public services that address the most basic needs in the community. So those are our youth services, our after-school programs, the operations of our local food pantries, domestic violence programs and drop-in centers, rental assistance, etc. We are also able to make capital improvements to our public facilities, such as our community centers, rec centers. We also make improvements to our parks, our playgrounds, our streets and our sidewalks, and plant trees in low-income neighborhoods. These funds are also used for affordable housing construction and rehabilitation of blighted, vacant, and abandoned properties. We implement a homeowner repair program, as well as an economic development and technical assistance program for very small businesses. And finally, we use our HOPA funds for leased housing and supportive services for people living with HIV and AIDS. When the city received its allocation of CARES funds, we issued targeted RFPs specifically for identified areas of need, which we identified as testing, vaccination, and wraparound community health services. So new or expanded COVID-19 testing and vaccination sites, as well as community health, wraparound community health services to encourage vaccination, testing, and coordination of care. Additionally, it became very apparent that food distribution programs, especially for the homebound, the elderly, and the highest risk, was of critical importance, as well as an increase in surge in resources for emergency housing support. Newer expanded programs to provide housing to our most vulnerable, such as our unhoused or those being released on early parole due to COVID, or our elderly, and investments to prevent homelessness through eviction defense and rental assistance. Additionally, we made available the opportunity to make permanent investments in public facilities to enable safe delivery of services during the pandemic as well as beyond. We made available funds for economic development for small business recovery programs. And then in concert with the state and other Rhode Island entitlement communities, we released additional dollars for homelessness response through the Consolidated Homeless Fund, which I'll describe in a short bit. So in total, we have released $943,000 in subawards to many qualified organizations who have been truly critical. I cannot understate how critical these organizations have been during the city's pandemic recovery and response. So $943,000 for vaccination, testing, and community health workers, along with mental health services. Over $1 million in subawards to a variety of organizations delivering food security programs, food distribution, food pantries to our most vulnerable populations. $990,000 in subawards have been made to a variety of shelter programs and housing providers, as well as to support expanded eviction defense, which has been critical during the pandemic to ensure that constituents know their rights and were not unjustly evicted during the period of the pandemic. Additionally, we made available $315,000 to extremely small businesses, our micro enterprises, for pandemic recovery to offset their losses during the pandemic. And we are in the process of launching with Oasis International, a small business technical support program focused on recovery during the pandemic. I also wanted to make a point of highlighting that the Providence Business Loan Fund, which is a revolving loan fund operated through the city and funded with EDA and CDBG funding, was able to issue over $1 million in low interest emergency loans during the course of the pandemic to Providence businesses for stabilization and employee retention. And those funds remain available and are open. Applications are accepted on a rolling basis. So we were ultimately able to make $515,000 in investments in essentially permanent investments in some of our public facilities. we invested with $60,000. We're able to expand the Wi-Fi capability at all of our Providence Community Library locations. Project Outreach Food Pantry will be completing an expansion to increase the capacity of their food pantry. And then the Providence Community Health Center, Capitol Hill Health Center, is in the process right now of expanding and adding an addition, which will enable a separate entrance, visitor area, or excuse me, waiting area, and exam space for COVID positive or COVID suspect patients. The total budget of which is $1.8 million. Our investment here at the city was $425,000, and that project is well underway and anticipated to complete in December of 2021. So it's, very exciting, and we look forward to having a facility that's specifically geared towards treating COVID patients now and in the future. As I mentioned earlier, our homelessness investments right now are deployed through what's called the Consolidated Homeless Fund, which was established in 2012 as a one-stop funding consortium comprised of the state, as well as the Rhode Island entitlement cities, so Providence, Pawtucket, Woonsocket, with the goal of addressing homelessness and system needs holistically. So through our partnership with the CHF, the city was enabled to invest its ESG CV, Emergency Solutions Grant, disaster response dollars through the CHF for increased rapid rehousing assistance, which is midterm rental assistance that enables timely transition from homelessness into permanent housing and is coupled with intensive case management. Expanded street outreach to engage those unhoused and unsheltered folks living outside. Also the provision of critical care, management and referrals, and efforts to minimize transmission and encampments. Additional investments were made to expand critical services to increase coordination of benefits for our highest risk and unhoused persons. And then we have also made significant investments to operate overflow shelters and ensure that our shelters are clean and safe for both staff and patrons. So I know there's a break in the agenda. I wanted to take a pause there. That was a lot that I threw at you all. If there are any, to see if there are any questions on investments that we've made to date.
Thank you, Emily. This is Julian. That was a really helpful presentation, and great to see all the resources that have already been put out into community and what's being done through a variety of different funding sources to address the issues. Obviously, housing is such a huge issue statewide, but especially in Providence, and something that has come up, many different ways. So I guess this might be covered in the next section of the presentation, but was just wondering if between the resources that are kind of the regular coming in resources and the additional ones that came into CARES Act, how does that compare to kind of the total overall? Like if you were to say a wish list of everything that was needed to address housing costs in the city, how much of a budget need would that be, and how much is the gap between what's currently available for all of the programs that are currently running and what the actual need is? Has that been quantified, and kind of how large is that? And then related to that, other sources of funding that aren't just city specific but can help people in the city, like the state rent relief fund, which hopefully a large share of those will be going towards Providence as the largest population center, but any other kind of resources out there that can be coordinated beyond what the city has direct control of.
Yes, thanks, Julian. And some of that we will sort of flesh out a little bit further in additional slides. Absolutely, we are seeking to quantify the gap in needs. Certainly we know that and we'll discuss this a little bit further, there's been in excess of a 300% increase in homelessness in the state of Rhode Island. We did not receive a 300% commensurate increase in the amount of resources through the CARES Act to cover that need. So certainly there's a shortage there. We also know that we, as a state, are combating sort of years of disinvestment in affordable housing or underinvestment in affordable housing. And so our comprehensive housing strategy found that in order to meet the shortage of available units by 2030, we would need to be investing close to $225 million a year in housing construction to bring on new units. And we'll discuss that a little bit further in further slides.
Thank you.
Any other question? Could be possible that we have questions online? Check, please. There's no question? Okay, thank you. Anyway, the second part of the presentation.
Yeah, no, no, no.
All right.
Say-
Emily, you go ahead.
Sorry.
Sorry, clear to proceed?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So now I think to pivot, I think we need to talk about the challenges. Again, Julian touched upon a great issue, is that we obviously still are experiencing a shortage, and the need is greatly outpacing the current resources available. And we also anticipate that those recovery needs are going to anticipate beyond the next 12 months or longer. One particular initial challenge is that the CARES disaster relief funds that we received will be fully expended and must be fully expended by September 30th of 2022. So again, we don't anticipate that all of our recovery needs are going to be met or resolved in the next 12 months. And certainly from the get-go, the scope of need far exceeded the amount of resources available. Our other challenges are shortage of affordable housing units. The most acute shortage of which is for price appropriate households earning 30% of area median income or less. And we know that this will just be further exacerbated by the pandemic. We know that we have a number of families who experienced job loss during the pandemic. We have tens of thousands of families who are about to fall off the unemployment, quote unquote, unemployment benefit cliff. And we recently had the termination of an eviction moratorium. So our lowest income households' ability to afford or maintain their housing is going to be getting progressively more difficult, not easier, for thousands of our families. And our anti-displacement and comprehensive housing strategy that we completed in 2020 projected prior to the pandemic that we would have a shortage of 7,500 price appropriate units by 2030. And the price to construct those units would be in excess of $225 million a year. So it's a big task ahead of us. An additional challenge is our growing rates of unsheltered homelessness and the capacity limitations facing our system of service delivery for those who are unhoused. During the course of the pandemic and now, the CDC's social distancing guidelines precipitated the loss of 146 shelter beds, and the timeline to safely restore those beds and bring them back online is uncertain. As such, our shelters are at full capacity. There is a lack of available beds for placements, and the lack of housing units of permanent supportive or available private housing units is creating a logjam throughout our system. As of the most recent report for the coordinated entry system, there were 391 individuals, 51 adult households, and 165 families on the wait list for shelter bed. And this was week ending August 28th. A subset of those are 336 who've been identified as living in places not meant for human habitation in the last 2 weeks. And so that would be those who are unhoused, living outside, living in cars, living in places that are unsafe and not meant for habitation. To offset the loss of shelter beds, the state has been investing in hotel rooms. Currently, there are 134 hotel rooms housing in excess of 200 clients. While these are statewide figures, we can assume that the bulk of people experiencing homelessness statewide are in Providence because of our service location and our demographics. In terms of immediate priorities, we are, the state, the city, we are hearing that there is a tremendous need, and we are seeing a tremendous need to expand overflow and non-congregate shelter capacity. We need to add space and capacity to our shelter system and provide a safer alternative to sleeping in places not meant for human habitation. We need to be supportive of the efforts of the state to identify additional hotel partners to provide non-congregate shelter opportunity. Of concern is that the FEMA reimbursement for non-congregate and quarantine and isolation hotel rooms is slated to end November 30th. And perhaps sooner if the emergency declaration is lifted. Further complication, the largest hotel partner has sought release from their contract, and so the state and others and their partners are undergoing the challenging task of identifying new rooms and relocating clients.
So I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about future priorities. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bonnie Nickerson, the City Planning Director. Really nice to be with you all, even if I can't see you all from this vantage point. So Emily talked a little bit about the anti-displacement and comprehensive housing strategy that we released earlier this year. And so these future priorities are really reflected in that plan. So the first one is just producing additional units. So increasing the overall supply of affordable housing. And so, as Emily said, through our plan, we really prioritize this, this deep affordability, targeting those that are at 30% or less of area median income. And those units are, as we know, very, very difficult to produce. So we see that as an opportunity to take this influx of dollars and really target those units that the market and other subsidies just have a really hard time producing. So that's our priority for production. We also want to just preserve the existing stock of affordable housing that is out in our communities and in our neighborhoods. So we want to make investments to make those units healthier and more habitable through lead abatement. And we have some thoughts about expanding a rental rehab program and launching a pilot program around this certificate of habitability and actually registering rental units. So we would like to prioritize that with these dollars as well. And then preserving affordable units by actually thinking about acquisitions. So in our anti-displacement and comprehensive housing strategy, we really talked about opportunity neighborhoods and how to increase the number of affordable units citywide. So in each 25 of our 25 neighborhoods, how do we have a better balance? And so we would like to do some strategic acquisitions, both to bring new units online, but also to prevent those either naturally occurring affordable units from sort of becoming higher end market rate units, or those that have deed restrictions that are coming due and will be expiring in the future, acquiring those properties to extend the period of affordability. And then we had a lot of thoughts, a lot of efforts around just protecting and stabilizing households. So as you know, we've talked quite a bit about eviction defense and just putting in place protections to prevent the loss of housing. And then for those households who have been displaced, how do we invest in additional rapid rehousing programs, additional case management and navigation through that system? So we'll talk just a little bit more about each of these. I think, Emily, you are still driving. So for future priorities, we know that particularly for those deeply affordable units, a grant subsidy is just required. So as you may have heard earlier this year, the Providence Housing Trust launched a new housing bond. It was a $25 million housing bond that's capitalized through a general fund allocation, which is the first general fund investment into affordable housing. This is a great tool, but it is really steered towards project lending and construction lending, so below market rates for project and construction lending. So I think that's an important tool, but it does require repayment. So it is a layer of debt onto these projects. So we know for these deeply affordable units, we need to have additional just grant subsidy into the project. So that is really what we're focused on here with the recommendation for ARPA dollars. And then I think other folks had mentioned this earlier in the conversation, but we really want to think about how do we blend and leverage all these different sources together. So with our low interest construction lending that we have through the Housing Trust, how can we layer that with project-based vouchers through the Providence Housing Authority and other rental relief like the state rental subsidies and other programs that we know that are kind of parallel to our efforts in the city. And so shifting over to thinking about the preservation of housing, again, we talked a lot about, we have this naturally affordable housing stock through all of our neighborhoods that we really need to just bring those units into compliance, make them safe and habitable. So we would like to expand a rehab program to rental units. We have a rehab program that's specific to home ownership units. So we would like to expand that into rental units and think about a proactive code enforcement strategy. All of these are detailed in the plan, but I did want to just run through them briefly. So we had proposed to bring additional code enforcement online to proactively go out and make sure that each apartment is up to our code enforcement standards through a rental registry and certificate of habitability pilot program. And what that does is really shift the burden. Right now, our code enforcement is really complaint-based. So when we receive complaints, then we send inspectors out, and we really want to flip that upside down so that we are proactively ensuring that all of our housing stock is habitable and it is safe and healthy. So again, talking a little bit about acquisitions and preventing those units from expiring or becoming sort of more targeted to higher income, and then leveraging our rehab funds with other programs like the Lead Safe Providence program, Providence Water lead line replacement programs. And then the last priority here is really talking about protecting and stabilizing households. So I think folks know we do have quite a large investment right now in eviction defense. And then Emily talked a lot about how do we help households who are displaced to get into a quickly more stable housing situation. So investing in rapid rehousing, and then on a parallel track, investing in case management and the navigation through that process. And then as we talked about, how do we braid all of these things together and kind of bring them all together to have the biggest impact that we can with the sources of funds that we all have. So those are our future priorities, and I think we'll pause there and take questions or exchange ideas on what we've presented.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
Hi, Jen Hawkins, I'm not an expert. I just feel like this is probably the most important topic that the city is facing. It came out in the small survey results, and I just would encourage the task force to maybe handle this topic again. I think that, I don't know if we've got quorum at this point, several people have left. And so I think this is a really critical topic, and I'm really grateful for the presentation that Emily and Bonnie gave, but if we could maybe have them come back in person and have a thoughtful conversation on this really crucial topic, I think that'd be great.
Thank you for the suggestion. We will take into account. Peter, please.
Hi, Peter Aitken. Thank you very much to both of you. I have a comment and then a question. I guess the comment I want to make about the third item, or the second bullet under it, around rapid housing. I think all those pieces are important and valuable, and the benefit is that some of that can help people get housing quickly, as opposed to, the building, which can take time. But I do know now that we're struggling with some of our tenant-based rental assistance with having enough apartments available for people to find anything with that. So that is I guess where I think there could be limitations to the benefit of say, expanding rapid rehousing. And the question I had was related to that rehab program, do you have a specific requirement in mind that, say, if a landlord were to receive support and funding to rehab a unit, that they would continue to keep their apartment affordable for a certain number of years? Because given the way the housing market is in Providence, the worry I would have is that as soon as the unit is improved, that the landlord might say, this is a good time for me to raise the rent by $500 a month.
Yeah, that's a great point, Peter. We would propose to have that any kind of rental rehab funds would be linked with this certificate of habitability and registry. And also as part of that, there would be an affordability time period and compliance period associated with that, to your point exactly.
And to the comment Peter made earlier in regards to rapid rehousing, I think the thought is, the city and the state and other entitlements were able to, this year with our CARES dollars, do a one-time sizable infusion of rapid rehousing dollars, but we anticipate that infusion will have been exhausted within about 12 months. And so the thought is, the need is not necessarily going to go away as quickly as everyone would hope. And so thinking 2 to 3 years out, a sustained level of increased investment is probably warranted. And at the same time, as the Housing Authority knows really better than anyone, it's the lack of affordable and habitable units right now makes it very difficult to place folks to find housing, whether they have a voucher or rental assistance or not. And so we need to be making those investments in rental rehab, developing new units, and then having, increasing the supply at the same time.
Julian.
This is Julian again, following up on that topic, and thank you both so much for putting this all together. This is such an important topic, and I agree that there's more conversation needed on this. I think in addition to the really needed investments, and there are very large scope, wondering about additional policy needs that go along with that. So thinking a lot about dealing with absentee landlords came up in a lot of the kind of community engagement and focus groups, wondering kind of if there's an assessment or what we know about current vacant units or that are just out there that, the ability for either the PRA or eminent domain or kind of control to take those and turn them into more units, which might be quicker, hopefully, than just building from scratch. And then also things like rent control or local or statewide eviction moratorium, enforcement around things like the source of income discrimination law with the availability of rent relief dollars, which since those could be considered a source of income, the ability to kind of maintain and prevent evictions that way as well. So just wondering about what those kind of needs are and how those can be paired with investment, so that we don't get the kind of gentrification effect of investing resources in communities beyond, just depending on landlord goodwill, which I think we've seen from throughout the pandemic. It's sometimes there, but often is not there.
Yeah, I think those are great points. In our comprehensive housing strategy, we do have a whole series of policy and regulatory changes that we are recommending, as well as these funding and programmatic investments. So, and I think to an earlier point, there's so much to this topic, and we can get into the regulatory and policy recommendations as well. But I did want to just point to our work around vacant and abandoned properties. So for a few years, we've had a program called Every Home, where multiple city departments have come together to target vacant and abandoned residential structures throughout our neighborhoods. And we've had over 600 properties put back online through this program, which has been really, really successful. We have still about 245 properties throughout our neighborhoods that have been identified as vacant and abandoned. We have a registry now where those units are registered, and we have a database where we are tracking all of these units and strategically targeting units that are in, close to public places like schools, libraries, rec centers, and other important, not that every single one isn't important, but we strategically target them. And we use eminent domain. And as Emily said, we invest CDBG dollars. So there's a series of efforts and investments that go into vacant and abandoned housing, but we could absolutely boost that investment through ARPA funds and just increase the pace that we're able to address these units.
Okay. Any other question? Page, please.
Thank you. Hi, Brian. Thank you for this presentation, Page Cautious Park. From what Island Kids Count, this issue is absolutely extremely important. As we know, for children, so much of their outcomes really depends on first needing a safe, warm, reliable housing. So we know that's really important, and I'm so glad you presented this presentation to us. I have a question around the estimated cost. And sorry if I missed this. I see under priority 1, you listed for us the estimated cost for those 2 sub-bullets. But for priority 2, I'm really curious around what the expected cost would be for the first 2 bullets around ensuring the naturally affordable housing stock is safe and acquiring affordable housing as well. Do you have an estimated cost for those 2 priorities?
Yeah, I can. So I will ask Emily to speak to the first bullet because we do have a program that is up and running that is specific to home ownership. So we would be looking to expand that program to allow for rental units to qualify. On the second bullet, through strategic acquisitions, it's tough to quantify that with a dollar amount because, as Emily said, the need is so great that we could take the entire allocation of ARPA funds and that would be a great way to spend it. But there's so many needs and competing interests. So I think that's kind of impossible to put a number to. But tens of millions of dollars could easily be spent to acquire these strategic properties and ensure their long-term affordability throughout Providence easily. But I can go into that in more detail. I just didn't put a number here because the number is really, really large.
And I would say on the rehab side of things, those types of programs are scalable. So you can offer a smaller, for example, our homeowner rehab program serves about 25 households a year for a cost of about $300,000. So you can serve dozens of households, or we can scale it up and make a one-time transformative investment and offer a large-scale rehab program. So, it really is sort of flexible and could be in the hundreds of thousands or could be in the low millions.
And just a note about that too, I just want to be sure that folks do know that there is a level of capacity that we would have to execute effectively on all of these either new or expanded programs. So when we talk about proactive code enforcement, that actually requires us to bring on additional inspectors. And if we were to expand the rental rehab program, we would have to bring on additional compliance officers sort of accordingly to the investment.
Yeah.
Bonnie and Emily, I think just one thing that I think Paige's question came up. You had mentioned earlier that out of the comprehensive housing strategy plan that you identified to keep up with the shortage of 7,500 units annually by 2030, that you would need an annual investment of $225 million in production. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. So I think that the numbers that they're putting here are in hopes knowing what limitations the committee has in terms of the total available. But the point being, if we really could, $225 million a year for production. Yeah. Thank you.
Have you guys considered the lot over there that is owned by Lifespan, about 9 acres, adjacent to the highway? And I don't know, we could probably put a couple thousand units stacked properly on a place that hasn't paid taxes in 7 years, and probably do it substantially pretty fast. I mean, probably have to do it pretty fast. The other thing was, building a system that opens up new allocations for funds, with directly, like federal government does, since we're buying abandoned properties, they would be in revitalized zip codes. Those revitalized zip codes get, like good neighbor dollars for revitalization. This will also incentivize teachers to come in that would be African American, Black, Brown, whatnot, and we could incentivize them and gift them their properties after maybe 3 years of helping the neighborhood. And this would also help all the service industries by doing so. And this fund would actually be new funds that could help fund your affordable housing, because you could tap into the federal dollars. And there was a figure that wasn't on there, was a FEMA reimbursement. I don't have the documentation, but did they reimburse all of the funds that were spent? So is there a way that we could utilize this extra FEMA allocation to maybe purchase plots and build, you know, for instance, on top of these structures, instead of putting Wi-Fi and all these cables, we put structures on top of these libraries, and we can start to integrate families back into the curriculum of a library and things, and get these people educated so they're not actually dependent upon these structures. In 30 years, they could probably be educated enough to be out of the system of, you know, public dependency, because they'd be educated. So, I don't know. Training and coding skills, teaching them skills. Next generation, next job. We have to incentivize the home ownership package completely from the beginning. If they go through, they should be, you know, we should be rewarding people to get off of those subsidies. We should be rewarding them, you know, through public benefits and intensification. You know, it shouldn't just be the police officer or the first responder or the fireman is getting, you know, their health gifted to revitalize the neighborhood. It should be, you know, we've seen that everybody seems to be essential when necessary, so we should start to maybe open up ways to find allocated funds from the federal government to help sustain our community, instead of trying to, you know, pull from this small allocated fund that's going to dwindle just by inflation.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to add really quick, take a ride on the bus. There are so many blight properties around the city. There should be a program where you either use it or lose it, because those blight properties are causing environmental, you know, hazards, and we're in the overlapping housing crisis. You know, if you're not taking care of, I mean, these are the same properties that are not shoveled properly during the winter, and the owners will gladly take the fine, but it's causing environmental hazards. In the summer, you know, there's mold and all kinds of other things that over time I want to build. Also, I live in Ocean Island. There's a liquor store on almost every corner. My theory is, if you're going to have a business or do business in the neighborhood, you should pour back into that neighborhood. I mean, and that goes for all businesses. If you're going to have a business here, pour back into it. We finally gotten a line budget item for housing. Well, the same should go for businesses. And I think that, you know, things will begin to turn around as we put all these little systems, you know, in place to help communities that have the personal. But housing is definitely at the top. We can't do anything without housing. You know, really have to keep on top. You got to stand out in line or go to public restroom, or, you know, if you're using a water bottle. But that's beside the point. You know, housing. Housing is a human right. And we don't have a moratorium.
Yeah, thank you. We are supposed to have
One more thing, Michelle, about the head. People out,
jail is not, that's not, and then we want to put it there, that's right. We're not gonna lock up ourselves.
Well, I don't know, Bonnie and Emily, do you have any last comments before we go to the public comment session?
No, just thanks everyone for having us today, and we look forward to participating, hopefully, in future discussions.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'd be happy to come back and keep the conversation going. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that this is a topic that we'll need further discussion. Let's go to the public comment session. At 1:30 p.m. Do we have any question? Second.
If you would like to ask a question, please feel free to use the hand raising feature on Zoom, and we will take your question and promote you to the panelist room.
My only other question would be, have you used other companies to gather the same information and data? Did you put out a lottery to find out what, if there's anything that Rhode Island is great for, is data and data grabbing and, storing software. So, have you pitched other companies at the proposal to find the same findings or to find the findings in regards to this specific topic? Have you challenged other companies to go out there and be creative and find the information that we need to be able to heal our community? Or have you just specifically selected an organization that was ready to go because they were already prepared to see what was coming down the pipe?
I can answer that really quickly. So the comprehensive housing plan that Bonnie and Emily alluded to in their presentation, the city did go out to bid, so they put out a request for proposal to find a national agency or a reputable agency to help us complete numbers reports that had already been done throughout Providence as a state around housing needs for various organizations, and then look at other data available. So that massive report was actually working with a private entity to help us look at all the data that was available and go forward the recommendations, not just on the investment development housing, but on the policy points that Bonnie's team mentioned. So definitely go on to our city website, look at the comprehensive housing plan. We list all that the data sources too. So it's pretty comprehensive. We call it comprehensive for a reason. Right. It's pretty broad. Right. To work with.
Okay.
Well, if we don't have more questions, with motion for adjourn the meeting. Motion presented, second. So we conclude the meeting. We adjourn the meeting. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.